So welcome again to another episode of My Hope is Built On. And today I have another amazing guest on here, Bobi Conn. And Bobi is, again, lately I've been trying to reach out and find different folks to interview. And Bobi and I met through a platform that allows us to make connections. And I got to read her story, hear a little bit more about who she is in terms of listening to some things that she does. And I just thought, this would be an amazing person to have on the show because I think she has a lot to glean from in terms of hope and where her hope is. And so, Bobi, without stealing too much of your thunder, why don't you just go ahead and share with everybody a little bit about yourself, and we'll get going.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Bobi Conn, and I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. I live in Kentucky now, still in Appalachia. And I grew up dealing with all of the socioeconomic and other cultural sort of stereotypes that one might associate with Eastern Kentucky, and just grew up with a lot of difficult circumstances at times. But I also always found myself really in love with the landscape around me because Appalachia is a place of unrivaled beauty. And I had some other really positive influences and, elements of my life that were a big part of the hope that I was able to continue to draw on.
Mm.
And eventually I wrote a memoir that is in no small part inspired by the desire to help other people find hope, especially when they may feel like, the cards are stacked against them and that, life has been too difficult or they've made too many unfortunate choices so far and they're not sure how to turn things around.
Right. No, that's really good. So, and like I was saying earlier, is that I just felt like, your book and what your story sounds like it really aligns well with about bringing hope to people. So with that being said, Bobi, the first question is always, when you think of hope, what does hope mean to you?
I've been thinking about that in preparation for our talk today. And what I've landed on, I think the most succinct way for me to put it is to say, hope for me is understanding that things always change and I'm not in control of how everything is going to go. And that might sound a little counterintuitive because we associate safety with, things staying the same and having some sense of control over our lives. But for me, I've always needed hope when things were, dark and felt helpless or like they weren't going well. And what gave me hope in those moments is knowing it's not going to stay this way forever. And I can't predict what's going to happen, but I have every reason to believe there is more good to come that I just can't foresee it.
Yeah.
And that has brought me a lot of hope in my darker moments.
Yeah. So in other words, you're basically saying that, I can't control the situation, but I can control my response to the situation is what you're really saying, huh?
Yeah. And when you grow up in a world of chaos, like I did as a child, you know, I entered adulthood sort of reflecting all of that chaos that I had internalized. And when I began working on myself and after I made some progress, what I realized is that chaos is all around us. And if you don't try to control it and you don't let it control you, but you're able to make peace with it, then you can tap into that peace inside of yourself in lots of different situations. And I'm sure plenty of people have had to do that in more trying situations than I have. But it's certainly helped me a lot over the past 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. No, and I can understand that. And you want to know something too, though, is I think what you're saying is really spot on. But really never minimize either what you're going through either. It's
Oh,
you
yeah.
go, yeah, whatever you're going through, that's real to you in that moment. Even though somebody may be going through something worse than you, it's still very real and something that you've got to overcome in terms of a mountain in your life, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our suffering is relative,
Yeah.
and there is no yardstick, I think,
No,
that we
not at
can
all.
compare by.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the follow-up question to that is always, what is your hope built on then?
I think my hope is it's built on a lot of different things, and kind of necessarily so, because when I was little, I had a few things that gave me hope, but it was really hard to kind of come up with anything that lasted forever,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
My granny was a big part of my foundation as a child. She was the safe person, and her home was a safe place for me. Um, but as I became a young adult, I realized, I couldn't go. Well, when I was a young adult, I didn't have sense enough to go to her. Um, and then as I became a little older, she passed away in my later 20s, and I was really angry to lose her. Um, and then eventually I realized, she couldn't fix things for me, and
yeah,
no one else could fix things for me. So I had to figure out how to fix them myself. Um, but I still borrowed from like the love that I had felt from her, and also a lot of the experiences of beauty that I've witnessed in the
mhm,
natural world. And then just, moments of joy, like connecting with my children, or having a triumph in, having my book published. You know, um, it's none of those moments, I think, are enough to ride the waves on for the rest of your life. But I think that we have to look back to them and say, I had joy in this moment. I had this sense of elation and purpose, and I could have more of that. And basically just put in the work that you have to do to prepare yourself and make sure you're ready to experience it when the circumstances
yeah,
align.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think we all have had important people in our lives, and that played a pivotal point in terms of us finding some hopefulness in those things. So you use the term chaos. I love the term chaos in my life. And is there any particular chaotic moment where you can share with us, in terms of, where you were at that place of hopelessness, and then how, again, talking through what you just shared, how did you really pull yourself to a place of finding hope?
Yeah. As an adult, what comes to mind is there was a moment where I was a single mother of my son was 8 and my daughter was 1, and I had moved out of an abusive relationship
Mm,
into a house that I was renting. Um, the my daughter being so young, I had just graduated from grad school, and I hadn't started a new career um, with my new graduate degree. So I got work as an adjunct faculty at the university where I'd graduated from
okay.
right before she was born. But I thought that I was going to have more classes to teach than I did.
Yeah.
So when I left, it turned out the semester that began, they typically gave us 2 classes rather than 3. So my entire budget was out the window. I had 2/3 the income that I thought I was going to
Mm,
have. And I was just, I was really angry. That's my granny started dying around that time too.
okay.
She had cancer,
Mm,
and it was very fast in the progression. And she also had heart problems. So I'd been taking her to doctor's appointments for the heart problems
Right.
when they discovered the cancer. Um, and I didn't have supportive friendships. I didn't have, any healthy relationships. And so one day I was sort of walking around this rental house, which also, it was a great reflection of my misery. It was run down, felt like it hadn't been truly clean since the 1970s. And I was just walking around kind of angry and fuming about how unfair things were and how, it wasn't right. And I was a victim basically of all these different people and
Mm.
circumstances. And it hit me like a ton of bricks all of a sudden because I was thinking, how am I having all these like unhappy circumstances, unhealthy relationships? None of them look alike. They don't have anything in common. And what I realized was I am the common denominator in all of these circumstances and all of these situations. And I that was a lot to try to wrap my head around. But
Yeah.
what I realized in that moment was that with all of the chaos and me being the common denominator in all of these unhealthy, chaotic situations, I could only work on myself.
Mm.
And I needed to address what was going on within me instead of thinking that I could somehow, pick different people and create different circumstances in my life, because clearly there was something about me that was drawing this to me, or I was unconsciously creating these miserable situations.
Mm.
And that set me on a path of, working on myself and really trying to undo a lot of the conditioning in my mind that
Yeah.
had occurred in childhood.
Yeah. It's funny you say all that. I mean, I do some personal development classes and stuff as well. And one of the first things in personal development is self-awareness, right? And
Hmm.
and in order to know, in order to grow, you need to know yourself. And that's the first thing. And so it sounds like you came to a place of, yeah, I needed to do some self-reflection, self-discovery, and really begin to understand where it was at. And it might not necessarily have been that you're a bad individual or anything like that. It's just that maybe some things were just stemming from conscious choices that you're making and the outcome of those choices, and that is that a little bit of what was happening?
Well, not to make excuses, because I think we are all ultimately responsible
Yeah.
for our choices. But I've really had to grapple with what it means to experience trauma as a child,
Mm.
and then to see, like, one, how does that shape your thoughts, your perceptions? And we understand much better now than ever before,
Right.
how it can literally change the way a child's brain forms. And for me, it was dealing with, how the trauma I experienced primed me to, kind of recreate situations in which I was a victim. And it drew me to people who reminded me of, the traumatic relationships in childhood.
Yeah.
And it was all very unconscious and subconscious. But it wasn't until I was willing to look at it and have someone help me see it for what it was
Yeah.
that I could begin to change it.
And did that discovery come as a result of talking to somebody, or did the discovery come just through your own self-reflection?
I think that talking with someone else was really instrumental for me,
Yeah.
because basically, so I sought someone out who, like, I sought her out because of her interest in, like, holistic modalities and like a more spiritual approach rather
Right.
than just therapy.
Right.
I've been in therapy since I was 15, and that was not a very effective tool for me.
Right.
So, I wanted something that was more, basically spiritually driven than anything. But this woman that I worked with initially, she was just very straightforward and direct about what she saw my thinking, my thought process to
Yeah.
involve. And she kind of modeled for me how I could stop and ask myself, like, if I'm having a feeling of anger, okay, what am I angry about? What do I think this situation should be?
Mm,
You know, what am I telling myself is wrong or should be different?
right.
Or, you know, and so she would really interrogate my thought processes. And after doing that for a little while, I was able to do it on my own. But I do think that having someone to help me get started with that was paramount.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when you're talking about that. As I'm thinking to it, it started reminding me too that when you're in that moment of the victim mentality, you're in a hopeless state.
Hmm.
And it really is shifting that hopeless and finding hope somewhere. And so for a lot of people, that's hard to do. I mean, sometimes hopelessness is a very dark place, and it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel or to find that hope at the end of the tunnel. And what would you suggest to somebody, especially, you got a background of coming out of abusive relationship, being a single mother and all those things, and a lot of women today are dealing with that stuff. So how would you, especially to the women specifically, if they're feeling, man, I brought this all on myself, or they're feeling as a victim, and maybe it's, but it's not, it's a consequence, yeah, of situations, but you have an opportunity to change that. And how would you to talk to somebody like that?
Well, one of the things that I started doing that I think is a nice little trick um, of the brain, in my like darkest moments where I didn't care
Yeah.
about changing the narrative. I didn't care about, like I was in such a dark place that I was basically unable to access my like kind of mental tools.
Mm,
Um, or spiritual tools. What I decided to start doing was because, if you can give your brain a little boost of dopamine or
yeah.
serotonin, whatever the good chemicals, the good hormones that'll flood through our brain,
Right.
I thought that's a good way to sort of like jolt myself out of the darkest places. So when I found myself there, I started doing things like buying someone's coffee in a line behind me, or holding a door open for someone at a grocery store, and that sort of thing. Just like the little acts of kindness. And I was doing them for very like uh, self self-focused reasons, because I knew I needed that good feeling. But thankfully, it does make us feel good to be good to others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was one of the things that I started doing, um, just to kind of like pull myself out of the trenches. And then the other thing, especially for women who are looking at their lives and maybe saying, "Oh, you know, I really screwed up, and look what I've done, and these
Mm,
choices I've made." Um, you know, I've been there, absolutely. And I think the important thing to realize is you're not the only one who, you're not the only one and you're not the worst.
yeah.
There is no worst of, the catalog of unfortunate decisions that a person could make in their lifetime. And there is always um there is always there's always the opportunity for a different outcome, or for your story to go a different way,
Yeah.
as long as we wake up and we're alive. The possibilities are really endless,
Yeah.
and all you have to do is, there's so many stories out there about people turning their lives around after addiction,
Mm,
um, being very self-destructive, destructive toward others, and then like using their lives for good or having incredible amounts of success.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'd say, and the more of those stories that we read or we listen to, I think the more we open our minds to the possibility of a different kind of story for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. Rewrite your story, huh? You're in control
Yeah,
of it. Yeah,
yeah, it's not over until it's over. And if it's not
exactly.
over, like I say, you might have to fight for it, but you might as well, right?
Yeah.
We're alive. We might as well squeeze every bit of goodness that we can out of a lifetime.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier too, and wanted to go kind of back to that, was you were raised in the Appalachian area in Kentucky, kind of a area that was probably socioeconomically challenged more so than other areas. And there's many areas like that around the United States that are like that, right? But did you ever find that even in kind of that struggle, that there was a little bit of a kind of a poverty mindset, if you will, that, hey, this is the way life is because I see it all around me, so it must just be the way life is. And there was that, and it's never going to be meant to be for me in the cards kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, my father, excuse me, growing up was very, he blamed like rich people for
Mm,
our lack of money. And he would rage against bankers and banks and attorneys and like the wealthy families who I don't know how wealthy they really were, but kids that I went to class with, the
yeah.
ones
Yeah.
who lived in nice homes. So he was constantly like blaming them for our problems. And you know, I really wanted, um, even from a young age, I really wanted to be spiritually connected.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't until I had that realization in my late 20s of, oh, I am creating misery in my own life over and over. It wasn't until then that I realized too that I still felt like I was a poor person and was going to live like a poor person no matter
Right.
what,
Right.
and that was very much a vision of myself and not just, not an understanding of economics
Right.
and how money works or
Yeah.
what it takes to um, overcome poverty.
Yeah. And it's funny because how long did that take you to even shift that mindset from there?
Well, it's interesting. Once I started working with the woman that I mentioned, um, and that year I grossed $22,000, I remember, from my tax refund. And there's no telling how I managed to pay the bills, but I worked,
Yeah.
constantly. And I think it was 2 years later. Yeah, 2 years later, I got a job out of the blue. A woman emailed me at an old work email
Mm,
address. Um, and I hadn't been at that job since before graduate school, but I also did some part time work for them here and there. And still had my email address. Happened to see this email from this woman about a job that she couldn't take because she had moved out of state.
mm,
And so I interviewed for it
right.
and I got the job, and it immediately like catapulted me and my little family into the middle class.
Right.
So, um, but it was really hard to wrap my head around that. I was afraid to like lose food stamps and my kids' medical cards because I didn't know if I could make it.
Right.
And I was so scared that I would mess up and that we would end up homeless.
Mm,
Um, and I had to fight against that fear because the fear will make you do irrational things, and it will hamper your good decision making instead of inspiring you to make good decisions
Yeah.
when you're acting out of anxiety. So it's not just fight against that feeling, it's like trying to find peace and balance within yourself so that you aren't in that fight or flight mode against the concept of poverty and fear of homelessness and everything else.
Yeah. Now, and it's funny you mentioned all of that, because and the reason I asked that question too, so I've done very well for myself, but up until April 2019, I actually lost my job, and I've been out of work since April 2019. So as a course of that, I've tried to launch my own business, and of course that takes a little time of trying to get your own business off the ground and everything like that. But in the meantime, I had choices in there. How do I really want to perceive my situation today? And there's days where I do have to battle, because I think, man, I can't believe this is happening. I don't know why I'm still here, and especially at my age, and I struggle with all those things. But again, that's where, again, my hope being built where it is my foundation is trusting in God. And so I believe that no matter what this circumstance is, he will prevail and carry me through somewhere. And in the situation will change. And I got to tell you, I still have a roof over my head. I still have all the things that I need. So obviously think I'm being taken care of, but it's amazing how our mind can slip so quickly the minute we lose a little bit of hope in that situation.
Oh yeah, that's something I still have to deal with too.
Yeah.
I had a moment, I think it was last week, that I just fretting about something, and then I was like, okay, let's stop for a minute. Do I have food? Yes. Do I have a roof over my head? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I have anything like right in front of me that is truly a threat to my well-being? I was like, no. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, so we're gonna deal with this in a more like calm, logical way.
Yep. Yeah.
And not come from, not let that fear just overwhelm me and
Yeah.
shut down the better parts of my brain.
Yeah. And fear is a crippler, and it really is. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'd probably go on all day talking about these types of things, but I don't want to take a lot of time away from that. I wanted to give you some time maybe to share with everybody about your book, a little bit more about your book, how they can find your book. We're going to obviously put anything in the show notes or anything like that. And I think I saw a little snippet that you're actually writing something else too. So if you want to share about that, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I'll show you a copy of the cover here. It's In the Shadow of the Valley, which is inspired by the Bible verse. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, if I've got that right.
Yep.
So I did grow up going to church, and as I've mentioned a couple of times, like the desire for spiritual connection has been a big part of my life, even as a child, and that's certainly a big theme in this. What I wanted to do with it was I really wanted to, I wanted to do a lot. I had a lot of like really lofty plans with this memoir. On one hand, it's the story of growing up in Eastern Kentucky in some, in poverty and experiencing abuse. And then, drawing on like the beauty that I found in the land and at my granny's house, and even at church and in the Bible, and then in other books, like using those things to help me stay afloat and to help me hold on to hope so that I could begin to transform and become my own person, not like still shaped by those experiences, but not defined or limited by them. And I really wanted it to be a story that would, just be a thing of beauty for the reader, and hopefully a source of hope for the people who need it. And because I became an avid reader at an early age, I also really love language. And, the Bible is full of poetic language. I grew up reading the King James Version
Yeah.
of the Bible and still think of it as the I guess the most original translation, although there's plenty of those to talk about. But that version just had so much poetic language, and that was something that I made connections with later in literature that I read and poetry. So I wanted to kind of play with that as well and have a lot of this poetic language to evoke emotion and help people connect to the beauty that they experienced as children, and beautiful moments that I think humans have in common, which are part of the universal experience.
Right.
So that's a big part of what I was up to in this memoir. And then in next year, hopefully it'll be early next year, and I'll have a pub date fairly soon that I'll be announcing on my website and social media. But I have a novel that'll be coming out, and right now the title, if it doesn't change, it's called Before the Storm, and it is loosely inspired by some experiences, some stories that I grew up hearing about my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather was a moonshiner, and his heyday was during like the Great Depression, right. And he was in and out of prison, and so it's not they weren't all like beautiful stories, but it was certainly a powerful mythology to grow up with. And I really wanted to imagine what my great-grandmother's life could have been like, and what her interior life would have been like. So the novel is historical fiction meets magical realism.
Okay.
Magical realism, like in the vein of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, is my favorite genre or writing style. And I think it's really suitable for Appalachia in particular, like historically with our culture and
right.
The landscape. So, it too is about like exploring, self-empowerment and one's external circumstances and how we're shaped. And then we also find our agency given our very specific circumstances in life.
Well, that's awesome. I actually am really excited. I hadn't had a chance to buy your book yet, but I am going to go out and buy it so I could read it. I am looking forward to doing that, and I encourage everybody else who's listening to do the same thing. All the information will be in the show notes, so you can catch all that. We'll give you her website so you can stay on her email list to find out when her novel comes out, and that'd be awesome. And again, Bobi, thank you so much for being with us today, and I really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right.